Hey everyone! Sacrificing a rook in the opening is quite extreme and we must definitely have good reasons to do that. So today we're gonna learn a few opening lines where we can go for this very nice sacrifice and score some spectacular wins. So let's start with the first line where we can get a rook sacrifice after e4, c5, we get a Sicilian defense, and after knight to f3, e6, d4, takes, knight to f6, and knight to c3. Here the move bishop to b4 has been played, which leads the game to the pin variation. So black has an idea to take on e4, and after e5 and knight to d5, black plans to take on c3. Here we could play safe and go bishop to d2, but the move queen to g4 is a lot more interesting, counter-attacking on g7, and here black has a few options. If black takes on c3, we can first take on g7, attacking the rook, and after rook to f8, we go a3 and we're gonna get the piece back. So one idea by black is to defend the pawn on g7 with a move like g6. And here we're gonna play the move a3, attacking the bishop, even inviting black to take on c3. The point is that after bishop takes, b takes, and knight takes, we have great compensation for the pawn. Black has very weak dark squares without having the dark squared bishop. That's why after a3, black might try to be more clever and go queen to a5, putting more pressure on c3, since the pawn on a3 is pinned. But here we can actually take the bishop and even win the game. The point is that after black takes the rook, knight to b3 is a very nice retreating move. We are trapping the queen on a1, and white will get a decisive material advantage. Now let's move on to the second trap that we get in the king's gambit after e4, e5, and f4. If black takes, knight to f3 is a very common move in the position. And here black very often tries the very aggressive move g5, supporting the pawn on f4 and also planning to attack the knight on f3. And here after knight to c3, we're actually ignoring black's threat. And after g4 and knight to e5, here black has an additional move that looks quite dangerous, which is the move queen to h4, giving a check. If the king moves, then after a move like d6, white is gonna be in trouble. But here we can play the move g3, and after black takes, the pawn on h2 is pinned, but here we're gonna take with the queen on g4. So we attack the queen. If black trades the queen, then after knight takes, here white has very good compensation for the pawn. White has very active knights. Knight to d5 is an idea. But black might think that white blundered in this position because black has the move g2, giving a check and attacking the rook on h1. And after queen takes, black promotes, and black has an extra rook in the position, but white has very nice pieces, and this position is actually winning for white, because after the move queen to h5, we plan to take on f7, giving a check, and then giving a checkmate on f8. The only way to defend that is knight to h6, but after d4, we're bringing more pieces to the attack. Also, black's queen on h1 is actually stuck there, so the game is pretty much over. Black can try to counterattack with d6, but here we can simply take the knight on h6, and after black takes, white has a few options to win the game, but the easiest is to simply take on e1, we give a check, and then we can take the rook on h8. The next trap also appears in the pin variation in the Sicilian defense after e4, c5, knight to f3, e6, d4, takes, knight to f6, and knight to c3, bishop to b4, e5. We analyzed knight to d5, and we saw that queen to g4 is very interesting. With that in mind, black might try to go queen to a5, which again looks like a very interesting idea. Black is counter-attacking the knight and also attacking the pawn on e5. We cannot play queen to g4 in these positions with the knight on f6, but here we're gonna simply take the knight on f6. And after bishop takes, b takes, and queen takes, here we could even play the move bishop to d2, but this would allow queen takes d4, but a lot stronger is the move queen to d2, offering the rook on a1, and the follow-up is a very subtle move, which is the move c3. So now the queen on a1 is actually in danger. If black takes on f6, after knight to b3, queen to b1, and bishop to d3, we're gonna trap the queen. With that in mind, black can try queen to b1, but here we can still play bishop to d3, and after queen to b6, now we take on g7, and after rook to g8, so we got a minor piece in return for the rook, so white is only an exchange down, but white has much better pieces and this very strong pawn on g7. One way to continue here is to go queen to h6, planning to take on h7, and let me show you a nice way where the game could finish. After f5, queen takes, king to f7, trying to go for the pawn. Here white has more sacrifices, knight takes f5, and after e takes, bishop to c4, king to e7, and queen takes. The game is pretty much over. Queen to f8 will come, this pawn will promote. And just to show you a very nice finish, after queen to f6, white has many winning moves, but the move bishop to g5 is another nice sacrifice, pinning the queen, and after queen takes, queen to f8 is a very pretty checkmate. And before I show you the last traps, if you want to improve at chess, besides knowing some interesting opening lines, I have a free course that will provide you with a training plan for that, so feel free to check the link in the description. So the next trap after the moves d4, knight to f6, c4 and e6 we get an Indian defense, and after knight to c3, here black very often continues with bishop to b4 or even d5, but the move b6 has been tried, inviting white to occupy the center, and the idea is to follow up with the move bishop to b4, pinning the knight and trying to take the pawn e4. And after e5 and knight to e4, you probably guessed how can white continue here. Instead of defending the knight on c3, we counterattack with the move queen to g4, and after knight takes, here white has a safe option, which is the move a3, getting the piece back, but white could also go b takes c3, offering the rook on a1. After bishop takes, king to d1, we sacrifice the rook on a1. If black takes the rook, after queen takes, rook to f8, bishop to g5, attacks the queen. If black doesn't want to give the queen, black could go f6, but after bishop takes, rook takes, and it takes, the f pawn will promote. So this is going to be an easy win for white. So black could defend in this position with correct play, but it's not easy. King to f8 is a better try. Before we analyze that line, the move g6 here is actually quite bad, because after bishop to g5, white will trap black's queen. And the best way to go, which is definitely not easy, is to go d6. And the point is that after queen takes, rook to f8 and bishop to g5, black has the d7 square for the queen. The move king to f8 looks more natural, but here white also has some very nice traps. After rook to b1, black might be tempted to go knight to c6, attacking the pawn on d4, and after bishop to a3, black has to go king to g8. If black goes d6, after queen to f3, we get a fork, and white is winning material. And after bishop to a3 and king to g8, here white has a very nice rook lift. After rook to b3, attacking the bishop. Here black should sacrifice the bishop and play something like d6, trying to get some counterplay, because after bishop takes d4, out of nowhere, here white has queen takes g7, and after king takes, rook to g3, white is going to force a checkmate. The king cannot go to f8, and after king to h6, another very nice retreating move, bishop to c1, and after king to h5, bishop to e2, king to h4, rook to h3 is a checkmate. And the last trap we get it in the Italian game after e4, e5, knight to f3, knight to c6, bishop to c4 and bishop to c5. Here the move b4 is a very interesting try for white. This is the Evans gambit, white sacrifices a pawn to get a very quick c3 and d4. I have covered this line very deeply in another video. If black takes on b4, after c3, bishop to c5, black has other options that I covered in that video, but bishop to c5 looks natural, and after d4, it takes. One try by white is to simply castle, ignoring the pawn on d4. If black takes on c3 here, white could go queen to b3 or even take on f7, because after king takes, queen to d5, white is getting the piece back. So here white has tried the move d4, and after c takes d4, bishop to b6, here white has good compensation for the pawn with this very strong center. Knight to c3 could be played here, but the move d5 is a very interesting try to invite black to go wrong. So here black should move the knight. For example, after knight to e5, we could take. Now the bishop by come to a3. White has good compensation for the pawn here. But after d5, black might be tempted to go queen to f6, counter-attacking the rook on a1. But here white can simply take on c6, and after queen takes, here white has a very nice follow-up, which is the move bishop takes f7. We take a very important pawn, we give a check. If black takes on f7, after queen to b3, if black goes bishop to e6, we have knight to g5, or after the king moves, we go bishop to b2, and we trap the queen on a1. Black could still try something like king to f8, not taking the bishop, but here we could simply take the knight. If black takes with the king, then we go for the same idea, we give a check, and then we go bishop to b2. And after rook takes, white has a lot of compensation for the sacrifice material, even a winning position. One easy follow-up here is to go knight to g5 and try to get an attack against the king. So white has many different ways to activate the queen. Queen to b3, queen to d5, queen to f3, even queen to h5. It is just very hard for black to stop this. One important idea is that if black tries to attack the knight, we go queen to f3, we give a check, and we plan to invade on f7. And black is in no time to go queen to f6, because after knight to h7, we're going to fork the king and the queen. An interesting try for black here is to take the pawn a2. It is not about the material, but mainly to prevent queen to b3 or queen to d5 ideas. And the queen is also covering the f7 square. But it is not going to be enough. Here white has this very nice maneuver with the knight. Knight to c3, we attack the queen. And after the queen moves, now we go knight to d5. And with these two aggressive knights, the game is pretty much over. For example, after king to e8, white can bring the queen to h5. And after a move like g6, queen takes, we attack the rook, and we just have way too many threats, queen to f7, or even queen to e7, giving a checkmate. So hope that you enjoyed these very nice traps where we can sacrifice a lot of material to score some spectacular wins. Thanks a lot for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.